The real value of culture becomes evident in the face of crisis. Culture in the time of Corona. Virtual European Capital of Culture Forum on May 20 to 22.
Good afternoon, everyone from Kaunas, the Future European Capital of Culture 2022. We are starting our live broadcast of our session under the title Culture in Post-Pandemic Future, Retooling. My name is Jūratė Tutlytė. I am Curator of Design Program at Kaunas 2022, and I will be moderating today's session. I would like to greet also the audience in Lithuania now. Labą dieną visiems, sveikinuosi iš Kauno, Europos kultūros sostinės 2022 biuro. Pradedame šiandienos forumo sesijos transliaciją tema postpandeminės ateities kultūros persiorientavimas. Esu Jūratė Tutlytė, Kaunas 2022 dizaino programos kuratorė ir moderuosiu šios dienos sesiją. Visus, kuriems reikalingas vertimas, kviečiama įsijungti specialų sinchroninio vertimo kanalą, kurį rasite spustelėje nuorodą šio transliacijos lango apačioje. Taigi kviečiame ne tik klausytis, bet ir aktyviai užduoti klausimus, juos palikti komentarų langelyje. Atsakysime diskusijos metu gyvai arba dalyviai jums atsiųs atsakymus raštu vėliau. Welcome back. I will shortly introduce the structure of our session. It will consist of two parts. At the beginning, we will have the presentation of our keynote speaker, futurist Anne Boysen from Texas. She will answer short questions right after her presentation. Hello, Anne.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
And then we will have the discussion joined by artists and researchers, namely Rugilė Barzdžiukaitė, Aideen Barry, Julijonas Urbonas, Giuseppe Porcaro, Pier Luigi Sacco, and Anne Boysen as well. I will come back to introduce you them straight before our discussion part. But hello, everybody. Hi, good to see you waving. Okay, so save all your questions for the very end of the discussion when we plan to have more elaborated Q&A session. Please be active, get involved, and leave your questions and comments in the comment area. We hope to answer most of them live or later on. Okay, so really, I would love to start our session and discuss cultures in the future or futures of culture. You know, in times when it is hard to think about anything else but crisis, let's shift our attention and focus on future, partly because it might be too hard to stay in a quite a frightening reality, but mostly because we are giving kind of a call for a dramatic transformation, a call to reset ourselves and society as well. Everything is changing, shifting, and we keep on asking, you know, when things will get back to normal, but will they? I mean, what changes will last? How world will look like when this is all over? Or is this the new normal that we must embrace? Artists have always been kind of a super sensitive predictors for the future worlds, envisioning new realities, spaces, cosmoses, which pass limits of the past, present, and the future. The omnivirtual, the post-apocalyptic, the surreal, and surreal, isn't it? So what's next? Textile factories produce masks, automobile plants make respirators, perfumeries provide disinfectants. Do we all need to adopt new models to survive? What would be then the possible retooling scenarios for arts and culture? Here we are, so many questions to be asked. So that's why we have invited researchers together with artists to talk and share their insights. And to start with, I'm really excited to invite and introduce you our keynote speaker, Anne Boysen, who is a professional futurologist, trend scout, founder of After the Millennials Company, vice president of Texas World Future Society. She's a pioneer of bringing research, automation, and data analytics into foresight that she teaches at the University of Houston. Anne is of Norwegian origin, Texas-based speaker, and generational expert, focusing on human response to change. Anne, we are really excited to hear your presentation on digital natives under the title From Boomers to Zoomers, how Generation Z may influence our future after COVID-19. The floor is yours, Anne.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a wonderful opportunity. I wanted to first comment a little bit on this time that we're in. Somebody commented on my background that it could almost seem as if, of course, this is the coronavirus, but it can almost look as if it's a halo. And I got excited about it because I do believe that as much as this is a big test for humanity, this is a global crisis, I do believe that what we have here is an opportunity to, maybe there's something sanctifying even in this time, this juncture of time that we're in. Perhaps we will find our strength as a species, as a global community even. I really do believe it is in crisis that we find the new opportunities, and that's really how the future moves forward. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I chose to call my presentation From Boomers to Zoomers, as Zoomers has traditionally been a little bit of a wordplay on baby boomers, the generation that was born right after World War II and has dominated our culture for such a long time. Now, Zoomer was originally this wordplay on boomers being Generation Z. Now, of course, there's a completely new meaning to Zoomers, and very often we look to a new technology to kind of define what is the next generation, what is sort of establishing the paradigm that the next generation is going to live under. And of course, it's way too early to say, but this I felt like this was fitting for the time that we are in. Now, it might be tempting to ask, why would you want to study generations during a crisis? Isn't there so much else that we should focus on? Isn't there obviously we need to find new tests, we need to find new vaccines, we need to find new medicines, and attend to all of the economic effects of this crisis. The reason that I believe that generational change might be one of the main focus is that usually when we want to look at what creates the future, what moves us from one social condition to the next, what creates social change, it is not so much that individuals change so much over a lifetime. Normally what it is that you see a new cohort come into a new life phase. Many of us have heard of this phrase that 50 is the new 30, or maybe even 60 is the new 30. And what we really mean when we say this is that the 50-year-olds today share so little in common with the 50-year-olds maybe 40, 50 years ago. So again, we have this implicit recognition that it's usually when people come to a new life phase, in a new history in time, a new moment in time, they tend to be different. They tend to be different than the people who were of the same age before. And there's another important thing about another important reason to study generational change, and it's especially in a time of crisis, and it's because we perceive the crisis differently. So, for example, in a coronavirus time, we will perhaps perceive, the older generations might have this higher risk of getting infected, and the secondary effects of this virus, this pandemic, is mostly felt by younger generations. So there are many different reasons to try to look at this dynamic if we want to understand the future. So many generational researchers have postulated that generational change happen over a trajectory where history seems to go in cycles. There there is again a saying that history repeats itself. Now, Mark Twain had an interesting twist on that and said that, well, history does not really repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. So you can very often see these patterns in different cycles and patterns. If you go 80 years back from now, we go back to the Great Depression. We go back to another time where you had a lot of political instability. And we see this pattern. We whether you look at demographic cycles or political cycles or economic cycles, you very often see these shifts. And it has been postulated that it's often because over our lifespan, we forget. We need the elders to remind us what happened 80 years ago so we don't repeat the old mistakes. There's been other explanations that you have, for example, a technological paradigm that seems to be informing the way that we live, the way that our industry works, the way that our economy works. And as long as this works well, as long as everything works together, everything fits together, then things seem to flow in a certain way. Now, when you have a disruption, then suddenly you get these crises and you get these polarizations. It produces very often political cycles, political polarization. It even informs demographic cycles. In post-agrarian and post-industrial societies, very often what we see is that when times are tough, the birth rate goes down. In very many different societies, that's the case. And this has, again, an implication for the demographic structure and how income is generated in a society. So it really, everything is really connected, and we see these shifts in society. Now, this is important because we were at such a shift right when the coronavirus crisis happened. So it's, in many ways, it's not really causing much of a disruption, but it is intensifying. One famous American named Andrew Yang, who tried to run for president here recently, he said that what we are experiencing now, we are experiencing 10 years of change in a 10-month time. And I really think that's true. The one thing that is not really showing much cyclicality, at least not at the moment, is the amount of information that is being shared, downloaded, uploaded. In fact, it would take 181 million years for one person to download all the information that exists on the internet. And this does not seem to taper off anytime soon, especially now that we're all at home and we're generating these Zoom videos. So we're creating more digital footprint than we ever have. There's so much content. This is important if we want to understand the next generation, and it's particularly important if we work in any industry that has to do with the sharing of information, which is very typical for the arts and culture. I think it's particularly important, as it was mentioned, that artists are very often the first ones to pick up new trends. So how this is being communicated, the channels that you're choosing, the way that this is put together in order to connect with an audience is very important as well. Because there's obviously a quantitative dimension to these huge volumes of information that are out there, but there's qualitative shifts as well. And we see that on the generational level. As a matter of fact, one of the most important questions or common questions that I get as a generational researcher is, why do Generation Z, why do these Zoomers, why do they have such a short attention span? And this is the answer. Very often we seek answer in, they have more ADHD, or the parents haven't taught them how to read books, or there's all these explanations, but really what it is, it's because there is so much information out there. And so if this generation is going to have any chance of keeping up with their 140 text messages, or every time somebody posts something that warrants a comment, they can't really stretch their attention as much. And we see it also even now in the way that different generations are using information and consuming information about both about the coronavirus and how they're using media in general. As you can see, boomers, the older you are, the more likely you are to have a very one-dimensional or two-dimensional information channels. And very often those information channels are top-down oriented. They're not very co-creative. They're not driven by co-creation of content. It's very much you choose your channel where you get your information from, and then you get it, and that's what determines how you perceive and how you analyze that information. When we get all the way down to the Generation Z or Zoomers, they're very much part of creating that information, as well as curating it and sharing it with others. So it's a very different dynamic. So we see this both in a quantitative and a qualitative dimension. Because when you can sit in Kaunas, or you can sit in Austin, Texas, or you can sit in Oslo, Norway, you can sit in China, wherever you sit and you're a 14-year-old and you play this video game with someone who might be thousands of miles away from you, you are creating a different community, a different reality than what I did when I was a child. We also had pen pals. When we were younger, we would write these letters and then we would put them in an envelope and we would try to share a little bit of our own culture with someone who lived far, far away. But first of all, it took time to send it in the mail. And then when they finally received it, so much had changed. And you can really have that dynamic interaction. And you really notice these huge cultural differences. So what you see now is that there's a convergence in culture in this youngest generation because they have this connection. They have this functional integration that is made possible by digital technology. So it could be very tempting then to say that, well, this living in our bedrooms with screens, what we have to do now during this crisis, this is the future, and it doesn't have any problems, and that is just the way things are. It's not so simple though. Because I want to say, if you're going to take a youth generation that has ever lived, I would guess that this is the generation that is the most capable of handling a crisis such as this. And if we're going to have new pandemics in the future, that this becomes sort of this hunker down new modality that we're going to have to get used to. I do think that this generation is the one that is going to handle it the best because they are used to spending more hours in their bedrooms and in their living rooms with screens. But it's a big mistake, it's a big misunderstanding to think that this is completely unproblematic. Because what this generation usually answers in surveys is that they're using the screens for convenience. It's not the chosen medium. They do prefer face-to-face communication. In fact, in most surveys, this generation, this very youngest generation, they tend to prefer face-to-face more than millennials. So what it really means to be a digital native, it doesn't mean so much that you are infatuated with digital technology. So again, I'm a native Norwegian, and so I have a native understanding of my own culture. When I bring friends or family from the States to Norway, they see the beautiful part of it. They see the things that you want to show a tourist. But I have been in Norway on a cold winter's day in February when it's dreary outside. So I've seen that part of it as well. It's the same thing for digital natives. If you have grown up knowing nothing but digital technology, a reality that is informed and catalyzed by digital technology, you also know the bad parts of it. You might have had some embarrassing photos shared by you by some older relatives. So again, they have this innate connection to technology, so they're able to kind of appreciate these part of our reality that is not digital. I don't think it's a coincidence that vinyl and cassette players even and Polaroid camera made a comeback with this generation. It's precisely because they wanted this tactile. And that is what I see in the cultural sector as well. It is a sacrifice to not be able to go to a physical museum, to not go to a physical concert event. And they report more loneliness when they have to stay inside all the time. As many as 47% during these last 2 months being hunkered down at home are reporting increasing amounts of loneliness. And that was already very high for Generation Z. And that's there are global statistics on that loneliness, depression, and mental health problems are actually highest in this youngest generation. So this is not exactly helping that. We also see that this is increasing among parents who have children under 18. Another interesting statistic is to find that the increasing amount of mental health problem due to coronavirus is actually highest among women, among young people, and among minorities. Now, that is not the groups that are, those are not the groups that are the most susceptible to complications of the virus. So we have to ask ourselves, what is causing this? And again, that is probably because the economic effects are mostly felt by these groups. So it is very important when we look at the problem like a pandemic and how that's going to shape the future. It's not just the disease itself, it's all of these secondary effects. It's this fact that we're going into a new recession, possibly even a new depression. And the cohorts that are going to feel this the most are the ones that are young today. This is going to reverberate for years to come, and we have to take this seriously. Already now, we see that the age difference in COVID exposure, whether it's to jobs that have a higher infection rate or the ones that are now being laid off, they tend to be younger. So I took some labor statistics and I looked at the different groups, whether their job consists of being face-to-face, and even though Generation Z prefers to be in face-to-face situation right now, nobody wants to be in face-to-face situations, and the ones who have jobs that are in those positions are the ones that are either being laid off or being exposed. Again, it tends to be, look at nurses, you look at people working in restaurants, if you look at people who are in those exposed professions, they tend to skew female, they tend to skew younger, so and very often minorities as well. So it is if we're looking at, I showed you the Gini index, which is basically a measure of showing income inequality to see the difference between the haves and the have-nots. This is an area that I think could become problematic in the future. I do believe in finding silver linings. I think that, again, I want to go back to this. Every crisis is an opportunity. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And I think this is more important than ever. And I think when I communicate with teachers, with parents, with young people themselves, I really try to reinforce this because, or for people to look for this. What are the silver linings? What can I look at from the past normal that I don't want to bring with me into this future? If I look at this crisis, if I look at these, if we as a society can look at this problem and say, okay, we want to return to some of the past, but there are certain parts of the past that we can leave behind. I have noticed one thing in my own neighborhood. I live in a very child-friendly neighborhood, and in the past I haven't seen as much chalk art on the pavement. Now suddenly everybody's out doing chalk again, and I think it's because young people are not as pressured anymore. They're, when they don't have to go to school, it's not so much academic pressure. It's not so much pressure of constantly being of that hamster wheel of schoolwork and then after school activities and this very tightly scheduled life. They can be free again. They can go out and grow gardens again. Sounds like a Pollyanna reality, but it really is. It isn't, but it's those dimensions that children in the past have had an opportunity to explore, which has been much harder for this younger, very techie generation. I think that when if this becomes a new normal, I think that we're going to go more into these full immersive technologies with haptic feedback and VR and to recreate some of that lost connection that we have as a society. So we probably see a little bit of technology development as well. And again, I think that for this generation, what they will see this crisis in the future. I think they will see it possibly as a catalyst for change. Because right now, the very policy, the very same policies that many different countries are having to implement are the ones that young people and the advocates for young people have been talking about for a long time. So whether we talk about climate change now, all the planes are on the ground. We're not producing the same amount of pollution as we had. And the older generations used to tell the younger ones just a year ago that we can't do this, we can't afford it. We can't make all these huge changes as a society because guess what? That's going to reduce GDP, that's going to reduce income growth. Well, we are there now, we are doing it. Can we use this as an opportunity to change? Because the fact is, if we're going to come out of this, and if we're going to use this to create a better future, we're going to have everybody on board. And this is an opportunity to actually to get all the generations together and really have a conversation about what future we really want to shape. Because as a matter of fact, the future is being shaped now. It's not something that we predict for the future. It's not something we predict. It's not something we can see in the crystal ball. It is something we create together now. And the choice is really what we want to make out of it. So that's what I had, and I look really forward to these discussions and if there are any questions.
Thank you greatly, Anne, for really enlightening, I would say, presentation. I think we'll have a good material for our discussion further on. But I have some comments from the audience. Laura Moore, she's commenting that she loves your background. And here is a question from Aurelia from Kaunas. She is asking, if millennials and Z generation are experiencing more loneliness caused by less live communication, how can cultural institutions contribute to minimize impacts of separation, and how to help to build closer connection between younger generation and their relatives' parents? I think this is a very good question.
Very good question, and one that is going to be difficult to answer, and that's why I'm very excited to hear about the ideas from the panels as well. I do think that the solution might be somewhere in, and this is going to sound contradictory, both in high tech, in low tech, and in interactions. So we have the high tech, the haptic feedback and the VR, and so to make it more immersive, to be able to get the feeling, like there are some museums already who have started implementing these technologies that make it possible. Of course, most people will not be able to afford to have such equipment, so this might be further down the line. This might be when this type of technology comes down the price curve, and we get these periodic lockdowns in the future for future pandemics. I also think that if you can connect with this generation the way that they connect with each other in social media, I really think that is the way to get through, because again, they don't have the attention span. They're not going to sit through a longish session in a screenplay. It's difficult for them because they have this short attention span. if there is a way to make them co-creators in the traditional arts, if it's possible to include them some kind of way. I'm not really sure what that might look like. I also think that the use of influencers, to try to find those who are already connecting with an audience, who might be endorsing the arts. Unfortunately, I don't know who that would be at the moment, but if it's possible to find, TikTok, of course, is very big right now. You have YouTube, you have TikTok, you have Instagram. It's all of these different influencers that can be that bridge, be that vehicle between the younger generations and the arts. Because I really do think that the arts is where they go when we are home, and especially when we feel lonely, and when we feel sad. What is it that we search for? It's the arts. We listen to music. We look at arts. We look at TV. We look at Netflix shows. So it is in the arts.
So you already mentioned as well that the children, they feel like unleashing their creativity, right? Because they don't have this strict schedule to follow up each day. So it's also the kind of a interesting point to take a look at, right?
Yes.
And then how to use it in the future. But I also think that because the question, my question would follow, because Aurelia is partly asking this. We are considering we are like a youth addict generation, so to say. We usually talk about the young generations, but what about the seniors in this, environment or this context at the moment, especially when we are talking about the COVID-19, right? This is a very fragile questions to ask. So maybe you can elaborate now a little bit until we are waiting for the next question from the audience.
Yes, I do think that this is definitely, obviously, this is the generation that is most directly affected, and not only from the threat itself, but many have not grown up with this technology. So there's this new learning curve to have to learn how to use it, and so they don't have the same intuitive feel. And again, if you look back at how the older generation is receiving information, they're used to this top down. They're used to being on the receiving, more of the passive receiving end. So I wonder if we could have like a situation where reverse mentoring takes place, where the older generation is possibly, and that includes my generation enough actually, where we learn from the younger ones and relearn how to create communities using these technologies. Not to look at it as a limitation, but as an opportunity, like we are doing now. For example, I don't know if I would be in Lithuania. I would have loved to, but we are actually creating a bond right now across thousands of miles, and I think that is the possible silver lining for the older generation, to use this opportunity. And I think it's incredibly important for both of these generations to understand that we are in this together. For older generations to understand that when young people are worried about their future, their health risk in the future, which is tightly linked to things like climate change, it's the same fear that older people might feel now for this pandemic. And so it's essential that we get these generations to talk together.
Thank you, Annie. And there is one more question to ask right away. Anna from Kaunas is asking, what excites you in the recent digital internet experiments within the artistic sphere? Have you been following the art scene online during the quarantine?
Gosh, you know what? I feel very embarrassed because I have wanted to, and I have been extremely busy, and it's my time has actually almost disappeared. So I have yet, but I've seen so many of my friends who have had this opportunity to really engage and learn, and so they're posting about it, and I'm like, oh, I need to check this out. I need to check that out. I think what has inspired me the most possibly is those videos from when people were in quarantine in high-risers, and they come out on their balconies, and they have these sessions, they have these musical sessions together, which really shows that even if we are close from one another, we come out and we do things together. We are so incredibly creative as a species that we are really using these limitations as an opportunity to find new outlets. And of course, there's these concerts, online concerts that people are having from their homes. I think it's very interesting to see, instead of, artists that you're used to seeing on the stage, now you see them in their home. It's almost like you get this intimate connection on a different level. So I do think that there's a value in that as well. And I enjoy it very much.
Okay, thank you. I think we are now diving to the creative world and then start our discussion with an artist that we have invited. So thank you, Anne, for your presentation and answers as well, but don't run away. Okay, and let me introduce then our panel members one by one. And I will start with Julijonas Urbonas, who is an artist. Thank you, Julijonas. Designer, researcher, and founder of Lithuanian Space Agency. He is associate professor and former prorector at Vilnius Academy of Arts, former CAO of an amusement park in Klaipėda. Currently, he is about to defend his PhD thesis on gravitational aesthetics at the Royal College of Art, London. His most recent project, Planet of People, will be presented at the 17th Venice Architecture Biennial. His work focuses on critical design, amusement park engineering, performative architecture, choreography, kinetic art, and science fiction. He experiments with what is real and what is not, and what can be real and not. As described by art critic Jaini Young, Julijonas' practice combines science and art in a way that also creates a unique kind of confusion. Hello, Julijonas. It's very good to have you there.
Hey.
Okay, our next panel member is Rugilė Barzdžiukaitė, theater and film director, scenographer, and side designer. She is a winner of Golden Lion for the Best National Pavilion at the Venice Biennial of Arts in 2019 for the collaborative work Sun and Sea, a contemporary opera. Also, she is awarded National Art and Cultural Prize. Her recent documentary, Acid Forest, was awarded at the Locarno International Film Festival in 2018 and was described by critics as fascinating, comic, surrealistic, hilarious documentary about man's absurd approach to both human existence and nature. Good to have you with us, Rugilė.
Hey, hello, thank you.
Hello. Next is Aideen Barry. She is a visual artist based in Ireland with international representation. She is an associate member to the Royal Iberian Academy and member of the Irish Association of Artists. Aideen teaches visual arts in several universities and schools. She has received numerous awards for her practice, including a Culture Island Award 2018, Modern Ireland and 100 Artworks 2015, the Silent Light Film Award at the Cork Film Festival, to mention just a few. Domesticity rendered wonderfully weird, perhaps is the most accurate description, I would say, of Aideen's works, where division between human, animal, automation, and mechanical devices blur. Welcome, Aideen. So good to have you with us. Next, we have Giuseppe Porcaro, already for the second time today. He is a political geographer, science fiction writer, expert in communication, international relations, and politics of the European Union. Giuseppe is producer and editor of the Europa Rama podcast, and author of science fiction book called Diskusijoje. He has also directed a mockumentary called Madame Pipi. And I really enjoyed his description, very informal one, that during the day, Giuseppe heads the communication team of the Bruegel think tank, and during the rest of time, he DJs, reads, streams, and writes. So welcome, Giuseppe. Good to have you with us. And last, we have Pier Luigi Sacco, professor of cultural economics at the University Institute of Modern Languages, Milan, senior researcher, Meta Lab at Harvard, and visiting scholar at Harvard University, director of Organization for Economics, Cooperation and Development, Venice office. He's the special advisor for the European Commissioner for Education and Culture, member of the European Research Advisory Board, of the Economics of Culture Committee of Italian Ministry of Culture. He is also known for coining the term Culture 3.0 to describe participatory culture, a cultural shift and transformation of audiences into practitioners. Hello, Pier Luigi, already for the second time in this our forum. Again, happy to have you. Okay, so before starting our discussion, I would like to address our artists on board, because, you know, it's been, we as the curators know that the artists are there with the super antennas to see that the newest trends, the futures to say. But, you know, the future is something like is actually connected with the present very, very much. So instead of asking maybe what's next, maybe we can fix on the present and ask what's there. So what's in the air, so to say. And my question is very simple. How are you as artists are doing today? I mean, how are you feeling in general? How does pandemic affect your creative routine and the ongoing projects? Maybe you are, or are you afraid of losing the job? And I would like to particularly to address Rugilė, because I know that after this great success winning the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennial of Arts last year, you and your team have a lot of plans and proposals to travel with the Sun and Sea Opera globally. So what is the situation with all those plans? I mean, are they postponed, or do you keep on proceeding? And if yes, how? Can you tell us?
Well, yes, we had a quite big plans for the tour this year, and all of this is rescheduled, of course. So now, out of maybe 15 tours, we only have 2 or 3 which are on a question mark for autumn. So this part has changed completely, but from the personal perspective, it's this stopover. It's not such a bad thing in general. It's quite a good time to contemplate on new things and to take time to, you know, to digest what has happened before. And job-wise, I think it's one of the most intense time of job offers which are floating, especially for online activity, online rehearsals, and so on. So I am not afraid of losing a job, no.
But then if you are proceeding with your works, I mean, how does that goes? If you were supposed to go with the, you know, your opera and make it in one place or another, how do you do this virtually? What happens with the, I mean, the creative process? How is that going on?
So in regards to Sun and Sea, which is a collaborative work with Lina Lapelytė and Vaiva Grainytė, we have a big, also a long discussions. How should we proceed? Because many festivals, they are now somehow reshaping their politics as well. And instead of inviting the whole team, asking whether we could make a local version distantly even, and then either come or not come, to see how it goes in the premiere. So this is I think we are now still in discussions whether we should travel and be with original work and maybe let it wait for longer while it can travel, or to make more work directed to local productions. I mean, making the same work but a different version of it, let's say in Australia or in Finland, in US and so on. So it would take much more time to make it, but at the same time, as our piece is dealing with climate change in a theme-wise, I mean, it even before the pandemics, we had also long discussions whether it is a right statement in action if we travel with a whole team to another continent to show the piece for some days and then go to another continent to show the piece again.
But this is a kind of a challenge when you are talking about, you will have kind of a local versions born, but that means that you as creators, isn't that the kind of a challenging way to lose kind of a part of your, I don't know, authenticity or authorship, so to say? Is it, does that mean that you are moving towards more collaborating or collaborative kind of work in that sense?
Well, in a way, we practiced this already for Venice, because we had a part of the cast who was Lithuanian and a part of the cast who was Italian. So we did it, not only Italian, but the ones who live there locally. So we did this already, but to make it completely, to rehearse digitally and then to know or not know whether you will come for the premiere, it's already, I think, a very different approach, of course, which questions this liveliness. I mean, the control, of course, the artistic control and so on.
Yeah. But I think the collaboration is somehow inevitable, right? In this kind of a online creation or co-creation.
Collaboration is always, like, whether it's online or offline, it's always a key in live arts.
Yeah, thank you, Rugilė, for now. But I would like to address Aideen. My question to you, you are well known for your collaborative, actually, projects that engage local communities in the creative process. Let's say in 2014, you were part of the EU project called Changing Tracks, where you engaged more than 800 people. I mean, and today you're working in Kaunas on video art project about Kaunas modernism architecture, yes, together with locals. Many of them are enthusiastic youngsters. So could you please reflect, and also maybe what's been said by Anne in her presentation about Generation Z and your experience working with them? How do you feel working with, youngsters or the younger generation in your project?
So just to put things in context, I was actually in Lithuania when the COVID broke out and had to leave Kaunas very urgently to fly back to Ireland because they were closing our country down. So I was organizing workshops with my collaborators, which are hundreds of young artists and students and dancers and young children and teachers. And suddenly all the changes had to happen immediately. I had to fly home to Ireland. And at the same time I was flying home, I was being elected to the Royal Hibernian Academy, which is a really high honor. And you have to give an address to the Royal Hibernian Academy. And I suddenly arrived home to being a mother of 3 children, having no childcare, and sharing my broadband with my 3 children, my now unemployed partner, and trying to think about how do I manage all of these international projects, and in particular the Kaunas project, from home, while also trying to entertain my family. So first of all, what I thought about doing was, and I'm just going to share you a screen, if that's okay, just to explain a little bit about how I operated. So I was asked to give this address or lecture, and I decided to change the whole thing. I said what I was going to do was give a workshop from my home via Zoom to anybody who wanted to join in on this family workshop that was going to be run with me and my 3 children and my partner in our kitchen. And what we ended up with was I was making a lot of stop motion animations anyway from home. I do a lot of surrealism. I think humor is a very important thing to use now. And I had shared some of these things online on social media, and they were getting a lot of interest. So in the end, we had 128 families join us via Zoom for this stop motion crash workshop. And what I said was to bring your families along, and you're going to direct me, and I'm going to teach you how to use the software from home that you can download for €10. And you're going to help me make my domestically weird workshop. So they directed me in what we called this short ironing board. So we had to, I was surfing on the ironing board, and they directed that the iron would become a shark and I would fall off. And we made this short loop. And then they were then, after doing this workshop, equipped with the whole knowledge of making animation. They had to then go away, make their own stop motion films. Sorry, it's a bit loud. And then send them to the Royal Hibernian Academy, and then they would stream them on their social media. So kind of like what Anne was talking about, the high-tech, low-tech and interactions, I had to immediately employ all these things that, you know, at home you would use your cardboard boxes, the centers of your toilet rolls that you've been stockpiling, all of those materials with your families to create these kind of stop motion animations. But also your question was about, you know, employment too. I'm also a teacher. It's how I sustain my practice as an artist. I'm a university professor in Limerick School of Art. And I was so devastated for my students that they weren't going to have an end of year show. Anybody who is an artist knows how important their end of year, their degree show is, because it's such a seminal event in the life of an artist. And I thought, we live in rural Ireland. I'm going to do something special. Now, I've been teaching in 3 different universities, the University of Edinburgh, VCU in Virginia, in Richmond in Virginia in the United States, and in my own university. So I invited all the students to email me or WeTransfer their end of year films or moving images. And I live in rural Ireland with my family. I live on the side of a mountain. Our nearest village has a population of 15 people. So I'm not in an urban center. So we, sorry, I'm just going to share this again, sorry. We put a 16-foot by 9-foot projection screen in, I hope you can all see that, in our field on the side of the Silvermine Mountains. And my family and I brought this screen up. I had 3 mobile phones and erected it in our field with our horses, and then live streamed via Instagram TV over the course of 2 nights this past week, Monday and Tuesday, the films from these amazing emerging artists, the next generation, the millennial generation, and some Gen Zers. Their contributions of their end of year shows were screened over 2 nights and live streamed on Facebook Live, Instagram Live, and on the various websites that I'm connected with through the universities. So it was a really important opportunity to be generous at this time when I have those kind of resources. Like, I have the screen, I had the projector, we had these big stack speakers, and the absurdity of placing this film to an audience that could never see it, but you had to see it online, and all the precariousness of streaming a film like that, or films over 2 nights live. So, okay, sorry. I hope that was.
Wow, it's really amazing. I mean, how big is the creative woman's power?
Well, it's out of necessity to try and entertain my family by giving these kind of projects to them too. I mean, one of the things that isn't really talked about is the impact on women artists and people and families, the lack of childcare, and then how do you adapt to all of those situations too. So anyway, so the plan is with the workshops, the stop motion animation workshops, we're going to continue this model with Kaunas 2022 and invite all of the participating young people to join me via Zoom in the same style of workshops.
So the work is continuing, right?
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah.
Thank you, Aideen, for sharing. Now I would look to Julijonas and ask, how are you? And maybe provoke you a bit. So my question is, so why do you want to catapult or eject human bodies into outer space and colonize other planets? I mean, of course, I'm talking about your recent project, Planet of People, but my question is, what is it? Kind of an experiment for the sake of experimentation, or kind of a foresight that there is no future on Earth anymore, you know, and the only way to survive is to catapult to other planets? But, you know, let's speculate a bit. Is there kind of a practical adaptation, a possibility to practically adapt or kind of use your project? Can it be useful for one from any perspective? What do you think?
It's a question that would take probably around 4 or 5 hours to at least to get the surface of it. But first of all, we have to be very careful. What do we mean by practicality and usability? These terms are quite open and very, very ideological, culturally biased. So, but when it comes to the relevance and urgency of a project, especially in terms of this particular crisis, I think most important aspect of this project, it's a kind of thought experiment, which is in a way real because it's backed up by scientific calculations and certain feasibility study. On the other hand, it's quite unreal because it's quite hard to imagine having a population of people being catapulted in outer space just to make a new planet out of their bodies. But when you think of this project as in the perspective of survivalists, you could imagine that when the time comes when we no longer can live on Earth and we have no plan to continue our living here, or at least we don't have any Noah's Ark. So what we would do, how we would celebrate the funerals of humanity. So these kind of discussions become especially relevant during crisis, but I think we should discuss even I wouldn't say apocalyptical, it really depends on how do you look at it, but we should discuss as soon as possible in order to prepare for these kind of scenarios. But on the other hand, it's the project that deals with particularly specific kind of zeitgeist that is defined as new space age. And it has little to do with this crisis, but it has something to do that has been defined as a new economy in space or space economy, and several other things. One of them is that artists come to space physically or imaginary. So there is an establishment of a term astro arts. So this project basically deals with this particular time of new space age and looks into how actually we Lithuanians as well as globally, how we can invite artists to space and how we can have an open access to space. That's why we established Lithuanian Space Agency, which is kind of extraterrestrial culture institution that particularly focuses on the extremes of imagination and living. But as you know, that Jūratė has just introduced, this project is going to be part of Venice Biennale, no longer 2020, but 2021, because it just was postponed again. And it is very, very unusual time for me and for many artists and for my team to all of a sudden get so much time. But I've never had so much time. All of a sudden you have a year for the project that is already, finished. What do you do with such a huge resources of time? I think it's very, very unprecedented. It's for everybody. Everybody, is rushing and working under very harsh deadlines and circumstances. But all of a sudden there is a pause, huge pause. It's something that we are about to discuss and to deal with. And I think this is something that would have a huge effect on the way we think and the way we imagine our project. Huge amount of time.
So is it changing? Is it, taking the different direction?
In one way or another, you cannot. Yeah, well, you see that. I think it's very usual for any pavilion to think about particular time, particular zeitgeist, and all of a sudden, if you got certain huge changes in time and space, you cannot show the same thing. You have to contextualize and to make it more relevant and urgent. And also you have, you have to do something for a year. You have to, you have a team of what do? You just sit and do nothing? No, we have to do something about it. So just in terms of logistics and in terms of context, it needs to change because of time.
But I want to come back to the question of the practicality. I was asking on purpose because the cultural and creative sector and arts as well, they are always constantly have to prove themselves, as being very unusual and useful. Nothing is very special about them. So especially in the crisis like this, how they can save lives. I mean, can they? So this is a question really to a little bit focus on the science and art and creative and artistic imagination as you are doing, because your projects, they are actually based in scientific ground. So you are really experimenting. And do you think this can be useful, maybe not for art, but maybe for other sciences like astrophysics or whatever, to broaden this kind of a creative imagination? How can it help us in the end, in various scientific projects? Julijonas, do you hear me?
Sorry, I thought it's the question for somebody else. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, sorry. Well, it has many perspectives upon this question. One of them is basically, it is something that has been discussed, this collaborative perspective upon the project. We've been working with all kinds of scientists, from hard sciences like astrophysics to humanities like astroanthropology. And we were discussing what it would take to make these new celestial bodies out of human bodies. And that requires specific kind of mode of thought and imagination that would allow you to get beyond terrestrial thinking or terrestrial bias. How do you go beyond something that we call in any discipline, like human, culture, nature, whatever? All these terms are terrestrial. They have been evolved and developed in this earthly ecosystem under constant earthly gravitational force and under human care. But once they are catapulted into outer space, all of a sudden they have to radically be rethought. The very foundations of these disciplines and terms like human being, nature, and so on. And in terms of practicality of this thought experiment, it allows us to find radically different solutions to whatever problems you think of, especially during the crisis. So it creates specific kind of space for thought and imagination under, in this particular case, extreme circumstances. And again, it also allows to come back to earthly perspective, because you cannot get rid of your body, which is terrestrial. You still come back to yourself, to Earth, but looking from the perspective of an alien. And we've been doing this for already half a year, and lots of scientists who contributed to the project, they have already kind of realized that they are getting somewhere that would not allow them to get there without such thought experiment. So it is more like a methodological, intellectual approach that allows them to come up with such ideas that would be impossible otherwise. So this one point that might be taken as practical, but there are many other aspects that probably I wouldn't steal the time from the other speakers.
So to say, you're pushing your imagination to the extreme. At the moment, you are experimenting together with scientists as well, right?
Yes. But you can compare with already quite existing practices that have something to do with, for example, design and architecture in extreme environment, escapism, survivalism. There is a huge branch of cultural activities, and as well it has something to do with the very aesthetics in general, how aesthetics could be seen, those that are catapulted in outer space. And it is quite similar to what we're experiencing now. We have all of a sudden quite unique kind of living conditions and circumstances under which we need to adapt. So, and if we talk about arts, that all of a sudden became domesticated in a way, but at the same time experiencing some kind of extreme circumstances, how do they have to adapt to such a situation? So these thought experiments like Planet of People, they allow us to put ourselves in this alternative reality and imagine what could be done and what are new opportunities and potential for something that has not happened, something unprecedented.
Thank you, Julijonas. And let's proceed on that creative imagination, or the limits of the creative imaginations. Giuseppe, you as a science fiction writer, and the science fiction methodology. My question is, as a method or as a way of thinking, may it be kind of also as be useful in one way or another? In other words, what's the role of science fiction, and how can it help us, to meet the challenges of this new unstable world, so to say? Can you comment?
Thank you, Jūratė. This is a very fitting question for the panel and for our discussion. And definitely, I can anticipate that I believe that we can use science fiction as a methodology, as we can use all forms of arts as a methodology in order to get something out from the art to daily life. That for sure, and I will come to this in a second. But if I may have just a comment to Anne, because before I heard with a lot of attention and interest her presentation, and I couldn't react immediately. But maybe I will try to make a bridge between what she said and your question, Jūratė. You mentioned about the attention span and the problems that we have with attention span, and you put it in the context of Generation Z, and I think rightly so, the generation somehow shows this phenomena on a more larger scale. But to a certain extent, and I like to think that we are all like suffering this kind of attention span moment. I mean, at least I see it with myself. I'm not the same person that I was like 10 years ago. I don't manage to read a book in the same way I used to read a book. I think that the generation, the way we define generations, and here we'll come in the science fiction side, in the way we define generations in an old way, which is genetic, which is linked to biology, I think it's kind of morphing into something else, because more and more we are all living in entering new eras and new generations. And somehow, if you think and you make a switch like that, it's true that the younger people, they might be more receptive because they don't have the previous imprint that the other generations have. But I can see also with my parents and the way when they started to learn how to use WhatsApp, for example, they all become like, I don't know, like little kids, and they all of a sudden discovered GIFs and memes, you know, and things like that. And here we come to science fiction, even if the two aspects might seem unrelated. Science fiction teaches that we can look at the world in a different way than we have been using to look at the world in an everyday life. What I mean is that what it can teach to us is the fact that we can think about the future, and here it's very much linked also to Julijonas' work, I would say. We're thinking about the future and the present in a very different way, because it allows us to multiply the outcomes of trajectories that might seem, and I think on this might differ very much from the work of futurologists, because futurologist tries to see what are the patterns and what are the patterns in today's world that can lead to predict somehow the future. And somehow in science fiction, we're trying to disrupt this process. We try to say, actually, we don't know what the future can be, but we can imagine whatever we want, and this can be plausible, and that different futures can be plausible. And that's where it answers to the question that Jūratė gave to me, how we make use of this. You know, like we all seemed kind of unprepared when the pandemics arrived, and basically we all thought, oh my God, this is like something that was not foreseen. But this was the same like 10 years ago when we had like the financial crisis. I mean, we had all these economists, and I worked for an economic think tank, that were all of a sudden say, oh yeah, but 1 year ago you were not predicting this. What happened, you know? But then you go into science fiction, not as a literature, but you know, in the broader sense, you can use science fiction as a methodology in art, in politics, in movie making, and in storytelling, and you see that we have all sorts of references about what was going on. You know, like we have all sorts of reference about the pandemics and the reaction to the pandemics, and somehow we saw these kind of reactions going on in different ways, mimicking, even like making fun of science fiction scenes, you know, from the more, let's say, frightening scenes of people in complete gears and biohazards and you know, like really having the fears, to, you know, jokes about injecting disinfectant in your lungs by the president of the United States, that not even in the wildest dreams of a science fiction writer would have been like something that someone would have predicted. So from this point of view, I think that we've been coming into an age, especially before this pandemic, and to some extent, where the look at the future has always been very much one directional, even when it comes to Europe. And this is a little bit the kind of material I more work with, especially in my podcast. Like the narratives for Europe has always started to be, especially after the financial crisis, only on one way. It's one way of decadence, of gloom, of economic despair, or environmental catastrophe on the other side. I think if we need to look at the seeds of something that can come after, we need to look it into reappropriate ourselves to this multiplicity of the future, and then trying to apply it in our practice. And it can be a cultural practice, or it can be a political practice, or even an academic practice. That's why we are actually, like, I'm involved in a couple of projects that starts to look at how we can use science fiction into academic writing, for example. So to reply to your question, yes, we can use science fiction. It's not a conventional tool, but it's definitely a useful tool for present.
Thank you, Giuseppe, for this very elaborated, disclosure of the question. Maybe Anne, you would love to react as Giuseppe was referring to your presentation. Anne, you should unmute yourself.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we hear you. Good.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, I absolutely agree that you cannot predict the future, and that is something that people who undergo foresight education are typically trained in using scenarios and thinking about the various possibilities and the various trajectories. And so, yeah, it's very much like that. I agree very, very much that you have to think in terms of potential disruptions. So I agree with that. I know a lot of futurists who will be reading your books because that's their main inspirations for working with clients and envisioning all of these futures. So I think some of the trends that I was talking about is more like to understand the baseline, to kind of have an understanding that this is where we are today. And then it's those wild cards. Then it's those, like you said, this being a wild card. And so how do we respond when we get a wild card like this? How do we, as a society, how do we tend to, given our human inclination, given the fact that we are idiosyncratic, and can we see some overall trend how we tend to do when we're faced with a particular situation? And so, yeah, I agree with that. And I also agree that older people are myself included, we're all getting to that, where we are, our attention span is getting shorter. That's very true. We have typically we have the generational effect, and then we have what we call a period effect. We're kind of all boiling in the same water, not realizing that we're the frogs that are being boiled, right? So the value of looking at generation is not so much to say that, you're different from that one, but it's just because very often when you have one group of people that share the same age and share the same sort of age location, and they move into a new cohort, there tends to be some movement. Very often it tends to shift and change some things in society. So, but excellent. I can't wait to read some of your books.
Anne, I was willing to ask you then, proceed with asking a question. What skills and competences do you think we will need or will be needed or in demand in the future? I know you're working with the companies and the businesses as well, consulting them. So what do you think about that? Can you disclose it?
Well, it's actually kind of bifurcated. I really do believe that we need to set ourselves, either you have to be completely on part with the automation and you can actually write the codes for the very sophisticated automating structures and algorithms. If you're not in control of that, you better not be the one that tries to compete with it, because the computer, very routine type of work is going to be taken over more and more by automated processes. So what does that leave us? Well, that leaves us with human ingenuity. So any job that requires human ingenuity, and that includes the art. I'm one of those people who don't think it's possible for artificial intelligence to create art, because I think it's intrinsically founded in the ability to feel things, in the ability to, it's linked to our our human condition. I don't think you can have a visual representation from a nice visual representation from created by artificial intelligence, but it doesn't speak the same language. It just coincidentally can interact with us, and it can evoke some sort of emotion. But I really do believe that artists have, in any profession that has to do with the arts, creativity, and also those who have to do with emotional intelligence. I don't think that is going to be taken over by computers. So I think that those are the skill sets that are going to be more important in the future.
So you are also thinking that we don't need more data, we need more data visualizing artists to tell us a story about the data, right?
Yeah, I do think we need data, but I don't think the human needs to, like, I think there can be more and more people who can free themselves from very mechanical operations and very sort of routine and mechanical operations. I think that there are more people who can focus on using that data, analyzing that data, and maybe using it for interesting purposes. But I don't think that you have to be, it's the assembly line is going to be over with, or the assembly line type of thinking is going to be over with. And it's a wonderful opportunity for creative thinkers. I think that's where the future might be where we need it in the future.
Thank you, Anne, once again. And now I would like to address to Pier Luigi. In your presentation 2 days ago, you pointed on importance of relationship between culture and well-being, psychological and mental health. We have heard already many times from Anne today that emotional things are very important, especially in the situation of crisis, right? We're also saying that the new professional profiles are there to be born out of these new connections of culture and other sectors, right? And also stress this, the need of culture to redefine, digitalize itself. So can you comment and elaborate a little bit, considering our today's discussion, this possible retooling or reindustrialization scenarios for art and culture?
Yeah, thank you. I think that this is probably one of the most promising future avenues for developing new areas of social impact of cultural production and participation. And what we already know is a bit surprising and not enough widespread in the awareness of the public opinion. For example, what we know already since the early epidemiological studies from the 90s is that on average, people who access regularly cultural experiences and opportunities live on average 2.5 years more than other people. So this is really a big difference. And we are today able to explain it to a certain extent, but not enough. So we don't really know completely why this is the case. And this is particularly interesting, though. What has been the most recent research has shown us that on one side, there is also a clear relationship not only between the duration of life and culture, but also quality of life. So our psychological well-being is deeply affected. And what is even more surprising, our own health is very, very strongly related to our cultural menus, let's say our cultural experiences and of course capabilities to access cultural experiences. There's been recently a report, a scoping report published by the World Health Organization that takes very seriously this and really launches this as a frontier of experimentation for the next few years. So one could say, okay, that's fine, we like this. But on the other hand, we could also say, look, I mean, arts are something that is not basically thought to be, let's say, a cure or a medicine or whatever it is. This is like instrumentalizing what art is. And art is art after all. And to some extent, this could also be true. We could say, okay, it's nice. We will discuss in a moment what could be the professional prospects for this. But on the other hand, we could say, yes, but are we, in some sense, manipulating what is the mission of art in the end, that is just doing research exactly like in any other field and without having particular concern of making it useful, so to speak. But the point is that what's happening, and this is partly also a result of the prevalence of digital culture today and the fact that people are more and more engaged into co-creating patterns and not simply participating passively. What's happening today is that the aesthetic mode itself is changing dramatically. We've been accustomed for thousands of years to think of culture as a form of elevation, something where the artist gives us, let's say, a superior insight into something that is a quasi-religious experience where we go to the museum, we go to the theater, and we get illuminated by this. Of course, this is very important. And by the way, the neuroaesthetics today is also explaining to us very clearly how this can be highly meaningful for people, and still is. Nevertheless, what's happening with this prevalence of new co-creation patterns is the fact that people are more and more aesthetically engaged, not simply insofar as they are illuminated, but as they are connected. So what is happening today is that the aesthetic accomplishment of a certain experience has very much to do with the fact that people feel themselves connected to some socially meaningful reality. And if this sense of connection is missing, in some sense, something is lost. What is the consequence for this? The consequence is that if you think of artistic production in aesthetics of connection, having social impact is not an instrumental consequence of what you do. It's the very notion of aesthetic accomplishment of what you do. So in some sense, instrumentalization is a category that works insofar as you think of an aesthetic mode of illumination that is connected to patronage, that is connected to a certain type of thinking of cultural production. But in the sphere that we are living today, having socially impactful consequences for your practice is in some sense poetically meaningful. So in this particular sense, I think that a future prospect in terms of the relationship between arts, well-being, and health is really harnessing the ingenuity, the visionary capacity of artists to create a new synthesis that is very much what we could call today a cultural welfare perspective. By the way, this is getting increasingly adopted by key stakeholders worldwide. Only a few days ago, I was participating in a webinar in Norway, in Bergen, that was all about this. It was about arts and well-being. And just to give you the idea, it was attended by the Prime Minister of Norway, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Culture, and the Minister of International Development. And they were all focused on this idea, that this is something that will be at the forefront of the future national policies in Norway. What's happening in Europe? Exactly the same. We have today the new European Agenda for Culture that underlines what we call the cultural crossover between culture, health, and well-being as one future line of European policies in the next cycle that is just beginning. For example, in Italy, we have now a pilot project by one of the most important foundations in Italy, Compagnia di San Paolo, that has launched a full program of financing pilot studies in culture and well-being, addressing directly cultural institutions. And now the same program has been adopted as a flagship project by the whole Federation of Cultural Foundations in Italy. So what I see is really an emerging pattern in which we don't think anymore. I mean, we never did, but we as a public opinion don't think anymore of culture as something that has to do simply with, let's say, entertainment and enjoying your free time, but it's more and more about the backbone, the architecture of your daily life, and how culture can, in some sense, participate in a huge process of behavioral change for the public interest. In this particular sense, this opens up, I think, exciting prospects for artists. I've been working and collaborating with many artist groups, and what I see today is a huge interest in this respect. Nobody feels instrumentalized by this. People tend to think that this is really a new, fantastic perspective to do something that, in some sense, it's meaningful to people, that can really help change people's lives in ways that are both, let's say, aesthetically meaningful, but also socially relevant. And this, I think, is a particularly important prospect. And this means, just to conclude, that we should probably look for new tracks, for example, of, let's say, training new artists, or let's say retraining also professionals already in the field to develop new possibilities, new projects in this area, because this area will be in high demand, I think, in the next few years. It could also be a way to help solve the sustainability problem that we see today, for example, in terms of financial viability, also as a consequence of the corona crisis that we should never forget, is first of all, as was already remarked, a crisis in terms of social connectedness, in terms of well-being. And so it's really, in some sense, this new development is really addressing, I think, in a very, very important way, the criticalities we'll have to face in the next few years.
Thank you, Pier Luigi, for such a broad perspective bringing in here. But I would like just pass this question to our artists. What do you think about that? Have you ever thought about your work being, in the connection with a health purposely or done by purpose? Have you thought about that? Can you comment, any of you?
Yes, I have felt that art and health are intrinsically linked, and authorship, the sense of authorship and ownership, is becoming much more and more relevant conversation going forward. I think one of the things I would love for the panel to discuss is that notion of democratization. If going forward, how we democratize access to culture and access to authorship. One of the things about this virus that I am concerned about is that the players of the internet are having a huge impact on the way culture is being accessed. And it's become apparent that a lot of people cannot access it because of class or social positions. And I think that will have a massive impact on the equality around the creation of artworks going forward.
Thank you, Aideen. Yeah.
I had one project that involved quite a number of people working in medicine, mostly in sleep medicine. We made a project that actually catapulted certain devices from sleep labs that somehow, by coincidence, triggered certain type of dreams. So in a way, they were directing certain dreams. But the most interesting discovery for me and for the scientists was that in that project, which was basically a hotel where you come, you book a session of 2-hour sleep, you are hooked up with these devices that monitor sleeping stages, and then they stimulate in various ways so that could direct your dreams. After 2 months of working, we noticed that one of the set of equipment actually was not installed properly. But the people who were sleeping with this set of equipment actually were telling them that they were affected by the device. So all of a sudden we realized there is a huge effect, a placebo effect going on. And then we started to focus on the logistics, on the infrastructure of placebo, the way the receptionists look like, the atmosphere, the sounds, the smells, the interior, everything was part of this huge placebo. And we came to such a point that we had to quit the project because some people who did not manage to fall asleep in our project, they would come back 2 months later, writing me emails or calling me, and they were swearing, God, what did you do to us? We brought something to our home. We are waking up in these dreams, we have lucid dreams. And I've never experienced like that. How can I get out of this? So you could see that how this kind of theatricals and these kind of props became a placebo, which is very hard to say whether it's a medical phenomenon or something else. So I think coronavirus is also in a way something something theatrical that manifests itself through various kind of props that in the media, in everyday life, discussions. It is really a cultural phenomenon, and it's different, you see, in each country. So this is where medicine and culture is really interrelated. It's very hard to separate each other.
But then, Jonas, you just pointed out that, to what extent we can merge art and medicine, because the artists always are, so to say, are there to play and make fun and also have a lot of comics around. You see, it's a kind of a different issues and different results that should be.
Yes. But by being challenging, being a bit too much makes you resilient, resistant. And challenges are very concepts. What do we mean by placebo, by medicine, pill, or the procedure of getting better, the very definition of what is it like to feel healthy is also really open. Actually, it's not objective. It's something that artists can redefine and challenge.
Saying that kind of artists have a power or capacity to shift the feelings as well, not only the perception, the behaviors of people, but then the feelings, right?
Think of Greek theater. Greek theater was basically designed as a platform of civic deliberation. So in that case, the idea was exactly to orchestrate the emotional response and the perception of people to spark a public debate. So of course it was entertaining, but it was first and foremost a platform of civic decision making. So we have completely lost that connection. We have to really recover the capacity that culture has to act as a driver of behavioral change, because some of the challenges we are facing today can really be addressed through culture in ways that could not be otherwise properly addressed. Think, for example, of the migrant crisis in Europe. How could you really address this through traditional policies? Of course, you can improve the living conditions. You can do whatever social support and economic support policies. But how do you change the mentality of people? How you create a new mental categorization of what the other than you is for you? You only have culture.
So I'm so happy we have come to the very, practical solution or conclusion, which way to go in the future, right? Anybody else want to comment on the theme we are on at the moment? Because I would love to shift now for the audience questions. So this is a moment to step in. Okay, so can I just shift my attention and bring you the Q&A session? Okay, can we do that? Because we have some questions from audience. For example, Laura is addressing Anne. She says, thank you so much for the great insights. I was born and raised in Lithuania and live in Georgia now. My question is, how can the young generation mental health be made healthy, positive, good?
That's a good question. I wish I knew. I really wish I had an answer. I do believe that the causes of the mental health crisis are multivariate. I know that there are many who are looking for different, some people say, oh, they're on their screens too much, or it's here in the States to talk about the school shootings, it's climate change and the worry over that. I think there's a myriad of causes, and I think there's going to be a multivariate solutions. I don't think it's going to be like one silver bullet that is going to do it. I do believe in conversation, and I believe in communication. Again, for this younger generation, if there's one issue that I pick up on a lot is that they feel that the world around them is not very transparent. In a way it is, because they have access to see through and find the answers for themselves, but they feel that they're being told one thing and they're seeing something different. So it's that discordance between realities and alternative truths. and again, of course, there's going to be many epistemologies and definitions and interpretations of what's going on. So, but I think dialogue, it starts there, and that dialogue needs to include them. It can't be like, okay, you're young, we're the ones that are making the decisions. The criticism against the gerontocracy, or at least here in the States, is pretty noticeable. We've seen it in the political arena, where they feel that there's a bunch of older people that are determining their future. So it's going to be incredibly important to bring young people into the conversations.
Thank you, Anne. And there is a question to Rugilė. What are the biggest challenges putting work online and expanding audiences after the biennial?
The biggest challenges for putting online, I think, resisting to put it online, because if there is a big demand, then yeah, you have to answer somehow to this demand. But what's the second part of the question? Can you repeat?
Yes, and I will repeat the question then. What are the biggest challenges putting work online and expanding audiences after the biennial?
Well, if we are speaking about Sun and Sea, we don't aim to expand audiences in a way. It's quite expanded already, and through touring, I think it will keep expanding. So there is no challenge, because we don't aim to expand it on purpose. I mean, we don't do any special actions to. It was a lot of actions before how to reach with the knowledge. We thought that no one will come to our pavilion because it's very far away from all the, touristic paths, and how to get funding and how to approach funders. So there were a lot of attempts before, and now this question is less relevant than it had been before.
Okay, thank you. And I think this question, the next question goes to Pier Luigi. Gytis from Kaunas is asking, what ways of commercializing, selling the digital forms of creative works would you envisage?
Well, there are multiple possibilities here. I think that on one side, especially for the most research-oriented and experimental forms of culture, as I tried to elaborate during the presentation that I gave on Monday, I think it's very important to imagine public platforms for content delivery that follow a different logic that is not just the commercial one, but however, they are not an idealistic way, let's say, to counter, let's say, the commercial logic. It's simply to do exactly what has been always done in the commercial, in the cultural field. So to have some specific channels for communication of cultural content that come from the public initiative, and then in some sense can support forms of cultural expression and research that are not immediately palatable for the commercial platforms, but that nevertheless can be extremely important as innovation engines that then afterwards, of course, are in some sense absorbed in terms of innovation content, also in the more commercial field. So it's extremely important to support this. The second point is that I think there will be a very deep and complex evolution of what is today crowdfunding, because crowdfunding is not simply a way of financing culture production in another way, is a way of participating. The most advanced platforms of crowdfunding are really socialization platforms, situations in which you create a community of practice. So in some sense, you vote for a certain type of project by opting in, not simply in terms of providing financial resources, but also by providing your own attention, energy, creativity, ingenuity, and so on and so forth. So I think that the future in this particular field, as much as we are able to build a rich social dimension around let's say the financial sustainability of projects in the digital sphere, will be probably one of the most interesting areas of innovation, not simply from the content point of view, but also from the organizational and managerial point of view.
Thank you, Pier Luigi. I'm really very happy that you have joined our discussion today. I know you have to leave just in some
Sorry
minutes.
about that.
Yeah, so maybe some last word you want to translate to our audience and our listeners?
I very much look forward to COSON 2022. I think it will be a very, very interesting experiment in cultural innovation in Europe. Good luck.
And thank you for being with us. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye. And we proceed with our question. We have still some to come about the younger generation. Anna is asking Aideen.
Yeah.
And she writes, I'm a younger producer from Brazil and have a lot of friends who are young artists. And we both know the importance showing our works. I just wanted to say thank you so much for what you did to make it possible and really touched me. So this is more the comment than the question, but there is another question from Vilte. I'm sorry, maybe you wanted to react.
No, that was very kind. That's okay, thank you.
And Vilte is asking, probably the methods you use to create a stop motion animation now are one of the best to connect a community of all ages at once. How this experience is different from working life?
It's very challenging because you're not in the room and you're not making, you're not picking up on nuances like physical cues from people and things like that, and you're not present in the workshop, so it's different in that way. So I have to give over direction to the participants in the workshop. So I have to be in front of the camera and they have to direct me. So that gives them a sense of ownership that they are the authors of the creative experience. So, and this is the whole modus operandi with this Heterotopia project, this new film project that we're going to do. I am just kind of, I can't be the author of the work. I require everybody to contribute to the making of this new Frankenstein in their own way. They are adding these body parts through the workshops, and then we are going to sew it together. So it's a real experimental approach. We don't know what the outcome will be. Everything will be birthed through the workshop processes. So it's very risky, but it's very exciting at the same time. And it was really funny to see what was able to be created in a 1-hour workshop already. So.
To be honest, I think I enjoyed a lot one of your comments in the Research magazine. Then you wrote that I can't tell this story because it's your story. I mean, you are enabling the community to speak their voices. But Giuseppe, you have also worked on this Discourse Hour with many other artists and writers and filmmakers on your book as well. Can you just comment a bit?
Well, to me, it was an experience of co-creation because, I mean, that's every artist has his own way. I mean, we've been seeing also with the others here in the panel that each has his own way of dealing with the issue of creation and co-creation. And I have to say that since for me it was the first time I was writing a fiction book, since the beginning I had the impression that I had equally a need for being alone and writing, because usually writing is seen as a solitary kind of exercise, but also to share and work with the concepts and the themes together with other artists of different disciplines. So that's why it became a very interdisciplinary kind of project, from film directors to performing artists like dance choreographers to video art and so on, because I really think that I really believe in this sort of on one hand this contamination that there can be among different disciplines, and also because to me the book was not it was a process. It was not the final, there is the physicality of the book, but in the end of the day what was mattering was this participatory aspect where I could have bring a community together, not only of artists, but also of the potential readers, where, I mean, it was mentioned before about crowdfunding, about how you build a community with your audience. So all these kind of things makes the work of art, I would say, nowadays very different than it used to be before, because we cannot live in this kind of vacuum. You know, we need to do it in a way that whatever we create lives its own life and lives its own life in different mediums.
And especially if we think about the, you know, working with different generation at one time, collaborating with them, right? So this is the very last question, which is also related to this theme from Karina. She says, thank you for a fascinating discussion. I've got a question for all the panelists based on Anne's presentation. How would you evaluate the current generational power relations in the art worlds, particularly theater industry? Are boomers still largely in power? And does the hamper the progress in the industry, that hamper the progress in the industry? Will that change after the pandemic? It's quite a complicated question. No.
Well, maybe I can attempt to say a few words. I'm not expert in theater, on the theater industry, so I can't really reply to the specifics. But we live in a world where I think there is, I don't like this kind of generational conflicts. I mean, like I'm from a generation that is from, there is no generation. I mean, like I'm from 1979. And 1979, it falls like not even fully in the X generation, not even fully the millennials. You know, like this whole thing about this boomers thing. I mean, for example, I think that we still have a lot to learn from the fact that they are coming from a generation where there was some sort of stability, where welfare state and certain things were taken for granted. So I'm also wary of the fact that this kind of discourse against the boomers, because to me it sounds, from one end it can be disruptive for new generations, but it can also be another way for basically dismantling any kind of welfare in you know, to have a very unregulated, totally ultra neoliberalist kind of world. So and hyper individualistic and so on. So I would tell to her, like, you know, let's try to see how we can work together, the different generations. We have a world that is very complex, and let's be careful with this kind of simplifying, dividing lines that are very easy to you know, to mimic.
Aideen, you want to say something as well?
I would agree with everything that was said there. I'm very nervous about pairing, and I'm also born in 1979, so I have that same kind of in-between feeling. I don't understand this position of competition in the generations. I do think we are in a very difficult time, and one of the great things that happened after the last big World War II was the NHS in the United Kingdom, which was the National Health Service. And what it came out of a time of great crises, where everybody really realized that you needed a national movement for society. So it was very interesting to hear Pier Luigi's presentation earlier on, where he talked about in Norway that they're thinking about a kind of a culture welfare. And I would love to see that culture welfare movement come cross-generationally from this. It would be amazing.
Thank you, Aideen. I think our time is running out and our discussion is coming to the end, very sadly. But maybe each of you would love to say some words at the very beginning of our meeting. So please, you're welcome.
At the end, I guess.
At the beginning, I said, okay.
We are starting all over again, you know?
Yeah, why not? You know,
It's a
the
loop.
loop.
It's a
The loop.
time-space loop. You don't know. Trapped in this dimension.
I was telling you know that there is a perception where you view the future as is in the line of with the present and the past as well. So we have this looping all the time.
Who said that the future is not future? Future is present, but future in present is not yet disseminated, or how is it manifested itself? Was it Ballard?
Maybe
that future is always present, but not yet manifested itself.
I have read somewhere from futurologists thinking that they are perceiving the future as in the very connection with the present and past. So maybe Anne could comment.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular quote. There's so many different quotes about the future to perceive it.
But it has been circulating between certain futurologists.
Yes, I'm sure.
Well, anyway,
I'll let you know if you find it. Yeah.
But maybe those who just said themselves, maybe there is no way to predict future.
Yes, there is no way to predict future. Well, I mean,
so just reconcile themselves with this failure.
Yeah.
Predicting future.
Yeah, no, the future is intrinsically unpredictable. Even from a statistical point of view, it's impossible because there are so many different constellations that need to come together at the same time that the probability that that would happen is 0.00, you know, there are more stars in the universe. So it is intrinsically unpredictable, at least when we talk about big futures. I wanted to just chime in a little bit because I very often hear that, this generational conflict. I second that so much. That's actually one of the reasons that I went into this research, is because I got the sense that, real or not, there's this sense that there's a conflict. And I think when there might be different stakeholder interests, I think it's very important to understand what are those differences and where can we get to communication. I think it's incredibly important to precisely so that we can avoid different escalation of conflict. Unfortunately, I feel that at least in the US, in the last few years, there's been a tendency for these different age cohorts to clash on certain different issues. And again, I think it's to try to view it from the perspective of an anthropologist, to have this idea. I think it was Leo Tolstoy who wrote it in Anna Karenina that every happy family is alike in that, there's an absence of things that are wrong, but every unhappy family are different for all different, or are unhappy for different reasons. And it's the same thing with generations in many ways. When big events happen, we perceive it differently based on where we are in life. And in order for us to really solve those issues, we have to try to empathize with those people who are at a different life stage and who might have a different story and a different experience.
Okay, thank you, Anne, for the comment. And anybody else wanted to say something for the very last, the end of our session?
I was afraid when Jūratė invited me, I was afraid that we will be forced to predict the future somehow. It was as if you would be asked what will happen after you are dead, and if you are intellectually responsible, you don't give answers for such questions. So I'm happy that this discussion went in another way.
Hopefully. Aideen, something from you? Just 1 minute left, almost.
Just to say, I'm very excited for Kaunas 2022, and I'm really excited that you're presenting these positions now 2 years in advance, because I think the whole topography is changing. I think everything is going to be it is unstable, but from this becomes positive opportunities to reinvent or look at things through different lenses. So it's been a very interesting conversation, and I really look forward to seeing how everything manifests from that.
And thanks for being with us on this project.
Thank you for having me.
Julijonas, maybe you have.
So what's left? Just to say bye-bye? I see, just because it's already 5 o'clock.
Julijonas, you are muted now. We can't hear you. You
Okay.
muted yourself, just right, strict at 5 o'clock.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Giuseppe, the very last. No.
I just want to thank Kaunas 22 for this initiative, and I hope that we will be able to have the same discussions in a physical form in Kaunas sometime soon, because that would be a very great moment for exchange and hopefully still being connected remotely with the audience, so that it's not limited to the people that can come there, but can be enlarged to everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you greatly for all of you, for all who have been with us during this forum for the very last, not only today, but also for the very last 2 days. In the name of the whole Kaunas 2022 team, I thank for the audience. I thank audience and listeners for their questions, their comments. I also are supposed to thank our Kaunas City Municipality, Kaunas District Municipality, Lithuanian Ministry of Culture, Creative Europe, Desk Lithuania, all speakers and partners, participants. And I use my time to thank also my team from Kaunas 2022 who worked really hard to make all this happen. So this is our time to stop. Let's hope for better future. It's in our hands. So let's make a change. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
The real value of culture becomes evident in the face of crisis. Culture in the time of Corona. Virtual European Capital of Culture Forum on May 20 to 22.